let's continue on this reckless speculation Thursday.
Reckless speculation.
We kind of talked about this with Doogie, but I think we should go full into the idea of blowing the whole thing up here. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off and talk about this. Last night, sitting down with our guy Alex Boone on the weekly Trenches with Boone episode of Purple Daily, and we actually had he spent the first 10 minutes just savaging the Vikings. I think he felt duped. He felt like he defended their honor all season. They're not frauds. Look what they're doing in the fourth quarter. Look at how organized they are offensively. You don't win close games like this by being fraudulent. And then the way that everything went down, some of the defensive gaffes, he was irate about the 4th and 8. And so he basically said, they're frauds. I was wrong. And he just destroyed KOC, Kirk Cousins' defense. And then about 10 minutes in, Jeremiah Sirles, former Vikings offensive lineman, former teammate of Boone's, and you can find him weekly on Matthew Collar's Purple Insider podcast as well. He jumped in because those guys had a dinner at the Combine bet at St. Elmo's Steakhouse. So he wanted to come on and rub it in Boone's face. Told you, Boone, they were frauds. Cyril's then stuck around for an hour and broke down film and stuff. And those guys both came to the same conclusion. They need to blow it up. And they both laid out, look at what's happening with the salary cap. Look at all the aging players. Thielen is now, through his wife on social media, saying he doesn't want to really be here anymore. Kirk Cousins, when given a chance, still makes the check down throw on 4th and 8. And they said, just rip the Band-Aid off. You can't possibly fix all the things that need to be fixed through free agency with $40 million and 4 draft picks. So what are your guys' thoughts on this? You know, we pushed hard for this last year, and they kind of proved us wrong in that they kind of ran it back, added some pieces, added a better coach and culture, and they won 13 games.
Yep.
So they were right.
Yep.
But now everyone's older. The cap space is not very plentiful. And you've got 2 credible former Vikings who follow the league very closely saying it's going to be hard to work out of this puzzle and be competitive at a Super Bowl level unless you take a step back. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts, and yes, I think what the Bears did is genius. So my thoughts are always, if you can nuke it, especially if you're sort of just stuck or not that good, nuke it. That's my personal thought. But let's talk about
genius, but they have to like follow it through now. They're set up, but they have to follow it through.
But they knew what they were doing. Like, they didn't accidentally get bad and like, oh my God, we sucked. What happened? They actually went through a process in which they got some answers about the most important position in sports, quarterback, which also now positions them to probably trade the first overall pick. But anyway, let's talk about this from a perspective of not what I would do necessarily, because I would probably blow things up. But let's go back to Kwesi's introductory press conference and the whole competitive rebuild topic, which is what they want to do. That's what the Wilfs want from them. The Wilfs, as I talked about with Dukes, we are now into the 3rd, 4th incarnation of different coaches, management with the Wilfs, and the stance has never changed. They've never purposely got bad. So I think what we've seen here, and this is what's going to be intriguing to watch now, and like you're going to border on this every year that you try what they've tried, but you've now sort of ridden the defense off the cliff. Like it's gone now. And so I don't think should they get rid of Kendricks? Should they get rid of Hicks? You know, Pat P is a key player. A lot of those players are off the cliff. And so the decision, when you do what the Vikings like to do, especially when you're then loyal to veteran players, the decision is eventually made for you.
Yeah.
So like, we're not at a point, well, Kendricks is still really productive, but no, he's not.
It's over.
It's over, right? So the defense is off the cliff. Now, what's interesting about this is when you do a competitive rebuild, you leave your different, your defense, offense, special teams to a certain point probably, but defense and offense, you leave them at different parts of the cycle. And that's where the Vikings are on what I consider to be a very slippery slope right now.
Yep.
Now, the one thing that I will say, if KOC, when KOC and Kwesi, and they probably haven't done it yet, but when they sit down with the Wilfs, the one thing that I would say is, look, Ziggy, Mark, Lenny, Jonathan, just the whole family's there.
A family of wolves.
Oh, just a pack of wolves hungering to know what the hell you're going to do. The one thing that, I think Quasi and KOC have to articulate is we were partially brought here because Kevin O'Connell is a quarterback whisperer of sorts. He knows that position. And so when he says to pull the ripcord on Kirk, I think they need to do that. Like, I know they like Kirk now and he's reliable. And keep in mind, guys, too, no matter what we might say about Kirk, since the Wolves bought this team in 2006, they have hungered for a consistent starting quarterback, and Kirk is that. So I could see them saying, doesn't it make sense to sign him to an extension? And I could see KOC saying, yeah, but I can find a quarterback too. So I think that's where this whole thing, apart from what I would do personally, I think that's where this gets really intriguing is like the defense is here. It's basically going down, or it's just at the bottom of the cliff, and the offense is okay. So, like, what are you going to do? How are you going to sync this thing up to get them to at least where they're at a point of meeting in the middle? Because that's how you are super competitive and can make a run.
And I hate to do like the look back. What if they would have blown it up a year ago? Where would they be? But just humor me on this for a moment, because you kind of mentioned this, just going through the different parts of your roster at different points. A competitive rebuild is really like you're clinging to some veterans to be competitive. You're rebuilding as you can. But if you would have gone, I kind of mocked the competitive rebuild a year ago, because it's like, well, I either want you to go all in being competitive while you have all these veteran players at the end of their line, or go all in rebuilding and rip the Band-Aid off and just do it quick. When you're doing both, you're not committed to either, right? You're not going full Rams, as Quasi said, but going full Rams won them a Super Bowl.
Correct.
And you're not going full rebuild because, well, you don't want to be the Bears. Oh, well, but look at what the Bears might turn into in a year or two because they ripped the Band-Aid off. So I wouldn't mock the two extremes like a lot of people are doing. If at this time last year they would have come to the conclusion that Ryan Poles came to in Chicago, and they would have said, yeah, we can be competitive, but we're not going to be like top of the food chain Super Bowl contenders. They to Kevin O'Connell's credit, they probably did as well or better than could be expected running it back, right? 13 wins, probably could have won one playoff game. I don't know that anyone would have favored them going into San Francisco or going into Philadelphia. That would have been a tough sled. But if at this time last year, if you had dangled Adam Thielen via trade, Harrison Smith via trade, Dalvin Cook via trade, maybe even Eric Kendricks via trade, or two or three of those guys, they had value a year ago. You would have compiled draft capital for either 2022 or 23, right? This time around, as you're looking here, so now we're looking at the same list of players, and we're sitting here saying, oh boy, if you want to shape up your salary cap, you got to get rid. And most Vikings fans are in full agreement with most of these players. You got to do some slicing and dicing. Adam Thielen on a trade might get you a 6th-round pick, but
I don't think so.
Probably not. Certainly not at that salary, right?
Yeah,
it'd have to come with a major salary restructure.
Yes.
I think Harrison Smith would get you something, but it's not going to be like a 2nd or 3rd-round pick at that price tag and that age.
Yep.
Dalvin might get you a 4th or a 5th, maybe, but he's also an aging running back.
Right.
Eric Kendricks, there's no way you can trade Eric Kendricks. There's no way you can trade Jordan Hicks, who wasn't around last year, but
no.
You've sort of sacrificed the value that you could have had just ripping the Band-Aid off and the cap relief you could have had by not pushing the kick in the can down the road for a 13-win sugar high and a one-and-done playoffs. And for a lot of fans, they probably said it was worth it. That was a really fun season. We had the Bills game, the Colts game, the Packers ass-kicking in week 1. Maybe that trade-off was worth it. But you're just kind of staring at the same problems that you had a year ago, but with older players and maybe even a little less cap flexibility in some ways.
And this team has been there with the Wolves before. I mean, as fun as 2009 was, that in retrospect offered a lot of the same things, which is Brett Favre is coming back to play for the Vikings. Oh my God. But he's Brett Favre, 38 at the time, 39. Look at that team. So like the Wolves, this is basically what this Vikings team is not surprising. If the Vikings had been the Bears, if Ryan Poles had gotten the Vikings job, and there were legit talks there, I think it came down to to finances for him and vision. If Ryan Poles had gotten this job, one of his first moves, I guarantee you, he trades Hunter. He would have traded Hunter.
Mhm.
The amount of draft picks, the amount of collateral that this team would have going into the 2023 draft with Poles would be unbelievable.
He would have traded Kirk Cousins too.
Yep. Probably.
For like 2 second-round picks or whatever the Colts rumor was at the time.
He would have made sure the team was bad. And in essence, though, for a 1 year of this stinks, you know what? You get a ton of cap relief, ton of cap room, ton of draft picks, a lot of things to like. That being said, Phil, I'm with you. I mean, the 13 wins was a fun year. But just go back and look. And since the Wolves bought this team, what we saw in 2022 was very much on point with their belief of let's just make the tournament and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they operate.
Yeah. Don't you think that the logical, just trying to take kind of the extremes of, there's one extreme where you could just keep bringing veterans back and digging yourself a hole, and then there's the other extreme of total rebuild. They're probably going to wind up somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
Because ownership looks at the history of this franchise, especially since they've been around. So they bought the team in like 2005.
Yes.
They've had one season since taking over. I'm sorry, 2 seasons of fewer than 6 wins. So 2 like train wreck seasons. 2013. Well, 2010 was a train wreck too, so we'll throw that one in. 2010, 11, and 13 were kind of train wrecky. Everything else has been competitive or really good.
Mm-hmm.
And historically, even, you can count on one hand, take away the first like 4 years of expansion. You can count basically on one hand how many train wreck seasons this 60-year franchise has had. There is a pride level in, we are sort of we're like diet Steelers. We never have to go into multi-year depressions, if you will.
Yes.
So I understand that. And maybe the way to bottle that pride and that legacy with also stripping it down is you say, okay, offensively, you got 5 young offensive linemen. All of them are relatively cheap. Well, Bradbury's going to maybe be gone or not cheap, but you got 5 young offensive linemen. You got your Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, your weapons over here. Like, the offense is not a rebuild.
Correct.
The offense is a move forward. So there's your competitive rebuild, right? Competitive offense. Rebuild defense. Eric Kendricks, Jordan Hicks, maybe Harrison Smith, Patrick Peterson, you just, Zadarius, anyone over the age of 30. This is right. The defense is a rebuild. Goodbye, poof. I don't know if you can recoup draft pick value, but if you can get a couple picks back for any of these players, like a Harrison Smith via trade or a Dalvin, and devote that to the defensive side of the ball, right, you could compete with your offense, rebuild with your defense. And at the end of the day, your defense isn't going to be with younger players and a new scheme. Maybe your defense, at worst, is the same. You know. Well,
and the most important thing to me as well on that side of the football is with a coordinator who can coach up the talent he has. Like, I don't think we're appreciating enough how stubborn Ed Donatel was. I don't think, like, O'Connell, and this is on him too. So O'Connell had this vision of, okay, this 3-4 that Fangio has run gave me real problems. We're going to run that. Nobody stopped and said, and what's weird about this is O'Connell did exactly this the right way on offense. Yeah. Nobody stopped and said, okay, let's look at our personnel. This guy doesn't really fit that. This guy really doesn't fit that. Like, how many guys, and look, a guy like Kendricks, I think, is basically done. Okay. So I'm not trying to bring him back or even defend him. But when you looked at Kendricks and said he's going to fit into this scheme, you know, these guys are paid millions of dollars or a lot of money to foresee this and to use their talent. And then the frustrating thing is the season progresses along, and into December, we're still hearing that there's adjustments being made to the scheme. Yeah. Okay. By December in this league, if there are adjustments to be made, they need to be made by the coaching staff to the players. So, like, I guess that's where I'm curious defensively is if you cut bait with guys, which fans don't like because, you know, they know the players. But if you cut bait with guys and then you bring in young guys who are, again, faster, and then most importantly, have a coordinator who says, you know what, ordinarily in my scheme, I would do this, but it doesn't make sense for this team and it doesn't make sense for this guy. So I'm going to do that. That's where
Yeah.
the adjustment is. Not, this whole thing about Danielle Hunter in December saying Danielle Hunter is still getting used. No, Danielle Hunter's an unbelievable football player. Ed Donatel, get your ass in your office, sit in front of the bleeping film.
No, don't ever go back to your office, actually.
At the time.
Your card key's been deactivated. I'm sorry.
I would have said, get in your office and figure out how to make him comfortable. I don't want to ever hear you say again, he's adjusting.
Right.
That's malpractice. That's poor coaching. And O'Connell, I talked about this on Purple Access with Chipper. O'Connell did a little bit of trying to pull the wool over the eyes yesterday by saying we actually were in 3-4 just X amount of the percentage of time. We played a lot of 4-3. Okay, dude, that's BS. And here's why. It's not how you line up. It's the scheme that you're calling for. Like it doesn't take a huge football fan to look at how the linebackers, the slow aging, as I think you said Monday or Deck said, plotting linebackers. Yeah. It doesn't take a lot to look at that and say, oh boy, we either need to replace these guys or it doesn't work. So don't tell me, well, the scheme actually, you guys are so caught up on 3-4. No, I'm caught up on the fact everything you did for the most part rarely worked.
Yeah. Yes. And even like you mentioned scheme and here's my scheme. And we need the players to play my scheme with very little room for wiggle.
Yep.
Patrick Jones is a guy that I'm curious about. Yeah. So Patrick Jones couldn't sniff a pressure basically all season. He had like 16 pressures, even though he rotated in a lot. He was kind of invisible when they'd put him out there. Well, he was a 3rd-round draft pick, a 6'5", 260-pound machine out of Pitt that over his last 2 years at Pitt, lining up, I don't know what defensive scheme Pitt ran, but he lined up on the outside all the time. He was essentially a hand-in-the-dirt outside pass rusher, and he tallied his last 2 years at Pitt. He tallied 100 pressures, 20 sacks, 67 quarterback hurries, 13 quarterback hits. And I'm not saying that's going to translate to him being Nick Bosa or something in the NFL. There's a reason why he fell to the 3rd round and wasn't a 1st-round edge rusher.
Sure. But
you're telling me that he's just useless? Just you basically can't play him? He can't get pressures in the NFL? That's like, and maybe the answer is, he's just not that good. He's not quick enough, or he doesn't pick up the technique or whatever. But I'm skeptical. I think if you were to get rid of Zadarius Smith for contract purposes, you should be able to move ahead pretty confidently going into year 3, knowing what Patrick Jones is by now. And you don't. So even stuff like that, what do they even have? You don't know, because I feel like the scheme is kind of masking what some of these players could be. So, or the incompetence of other players that are too old to be out there. I don't know. There's a lot to be unpacked here in the next few weeks. Imagine what those conversations. Well, if we're having these conversations.
Here's another one. I'll give you. And I was talking to someone about this yesterday, and it drove me crazy from day one. All right. So Lewis Cine shows up at training camp. And yes, you know what? He's probably not prepared to play and start immediately. But we're talking training camp. And unless he did something behind the scenes absolutely wrong, he's just buried on the second team. He's your 1st-round pick. Cam Bynum, who proved to be an okay player. He's probably very smart. But before he got hurt, Lewis Cine never even got a chance. And nobody said, you know what? Okay, he's not prepared completely, but how can we use him? How can we work him in?
Yeah.
What can we do to work? If he's a 6th-round pick, cool. Learn. Practice squad. Don't care. That's awesome. But he's a 1st-round pick. And we know he could do a lot of things. And aggressiveness. That's the other thing that drove me crazy. There were some very aggressive young players who were passed over for older passive players. Like, why wasn't Brian Asamoah playing more on Sunday? Explain that to me.
Dude, when we were breaking down some of these plays with Boone and Searles, and it's like this every week, the amount of times the Giants ran Saquon Barkley on some sort of creative route out of the backfield, and Jordan Hicks or Eric Kendricks are just like 10 yards behind trying to catch up. There's a couple plays where Daniel Jones either designed or flushed out of the pocket. Daniel Jones is running. Oh, Jordan Hicks trying to run over there, and Daniel Jones is outrunning Jordan Hicks.
Yes.
And even Kevin O'Connell in his press conference yesterday said, so he was asked specifically about speed. How big of a factor is just the lack of speed on defense? And he didn't trash anyone, but he said, yeah, the game is fast. The Vikings have slow linebackers. The Vikings have a slow aging cornerback in Patrick Peterson. Harrison Smith is not as fast as he used to be. They have a slow, non-mobile quarterback in a league where Daniel Jones is not the quarterback that Kirk Cousins is if it's just sit in the pocket and dissect. But you know what? Daniel Jones kept about 3 different drives alive or thriving because he could just run past Vikings linebackers. That's part of the game today. So
It's
a lot
interesting.
to unpack.
I got one more question. So I'm seeing tweets, and this happens every time. So I think Ed's gone, but I'm seeing tweets. Oh, guys, Jim Schwartz is gone now, and your list, Phil, is not starting to go, but there are guys being hired.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys think that Mike Pettin is the choice?
I don't think he should be.
Right, but
I think it's an easy move to make.
Okay, yeah, and he could run a 4-3. Because I do think one of the most important things is if he's coming back, Danielle Hunter needs to be as comfortable as possible from day one.
Yep.
You can't put him through this. Hey, you're still learning, doing a great job, Danny. No.
I'm not convinced. I was texting you guys this. We can do an episode on this sometime soon, but I'm not convinced Danielle Hunter's back.
Yeah, it's
I'm not
interesting. And you know what? He might not want to be back.
There's been a couple times the last couple of years where he's not really wanted to be back unless the money was right.
This might be a two-way street. So you might be right.
Dex, let's tell the audience about our friends at Underdog and how they can have more fun. I mean, it's already fun watching football, but it can be even more fun with Underdog.
That's right. Underdog Fantasy. My guy Josh here sent a little 5-item parlay slip here. A little 5-item slip. $2,000 for Josh. Little nice little 5-item slip there. I don't recommend if you're taking wild bets to take any Matt Dumba over-unders because he will be a healthy scratch against the Carolina Hurricanes, Judd Zolgad. That just came down on Thursday morning. He will be a healthy scratch. But you can still get mixed sports entries. You can still get NBA, NHL, NFL, PGA. I saw Live Golf got a new TV deal with the CW, so good for them. There's plenty of different options at Underdog Fantasy, the best and easiest way to play fantasy sports. Am I breaking news, by the way, to both of you right now on Matt Dumba and CW landing Live Golf?
I heard the second was coming. I didn't know.
You're
about
breaking the Dumba news. I did see this. So the CW, is the Live Golf TV partner, and it's going to be app only on Fridays on the CW app. You can watch Phil Mickelson.
Oh, it's not going to be on
Hilarious.
there.
Dude, they can't get a deal. They can't get a deal.
They can't get one.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, join Underdog Fantasy. Promo code SKOR, SKOR. They'll match your first deposit up to $100. Go download the Underdog Fantasy app.
And there's your reckless
speculation.
Speculation Thursday here. Inject it. I think across both Purple Daily primarily and Mackie and Judd, we just plan to be your home for daily Vikings speculation planning. If you thought the regular season was a good time, we actually love January through May equally or just as much because it's all about what could happen.
And so do you. That's the great thing. The viewers love it too.
The numbers reflect that in some of our.
We love you that you love reckless speculation.
Our biggest month in SKOR North history and the 3 years of SKOR North podcast YouTube was January of 2022. Jim Harbaugh, Kevin O'Connell, Kirk Cousins rumors and stuff.
Love coaching searches.
No coaching search this time around. But we might get some Donatel news at some point. We'll see you guys on Purple Daily as well today. Thanks for hanging out.